Meeple Nation Podcast, episode 362.
Better warm yourself up there.
Meeple Nation. All right. Meeple Nation Podcast, episode 362. 4 trading games. Except there's 3.
Why'd you just say 3 trading games?
Welcome, citizens of Meeple Nation. For the next 30 minutes, sit back and enjoy.
Meeple Nation Podcast is sponsored by GameToppersLLC.com. Go to their website, see how you can enhance your game table area with a Game Topper, a Game Topper mat, or any one of their awesome accessories to upgrade your game night to an amazing experience. Check them out, GameToppersLLC.com.
Welcome to Meeple Nation. We are your hosts. I am Andy Holliday.
I'm Nathan Howard.
And I'm Dave Holliday.
This week we are talking about trading games that each of us have selected. I'm really excited to talk about Andy's game because we had a blast with that. And I'm excited to talk about my game. My game is an old classic from way back when. Dave, yours is good too. No, Dave, you have a really good game as well from one of our friends, Ryan Laukat, who does some amazing games and does all the artwork himself. Andy just got his latest Kickstarter, Sleeping Gods, which we're excited to try out as well.
So excited to try out.
So why don't we start with yours, Dave?
Okay, so we're talking trading games. We talked a little last week about what that means.
We talked a lot last week about what I mean. Almost the whole episode.
Yeah. So the game that I chose to talk about is Above and Below. So we talked about several last week where the trading mechanic is vital to the game or very, very, very much involved. In Above and Below, it really has a fairly small role, but it really depends on the individual game. One of the things I love about this game is that it can go so many different ways and it can be very, very different every time you play it. So in some plays, the trading mechanic may end up being a lot more prevalent than in others. In the plays that I have been a part of, it has had very little to do with it. But it is a great game in all ways. In Above and Below, everybody has their own village that they are starting. Barbarians ransacked everybody's villages beforehand. You barely had time to pick up the baby and your favorite fishing pole before the barbarians started the burning and pillaging. You wandered far away, and I should back up just a little bit. So one of my favorite things about this game is the story. This is one of those awesome story-driven games.
Ryan does a very good job with the stories in his games.
Absolutely. It starts off with the introduction in story form. It tells you about what's happening here with the barbarians and everything else, right? You all leave, you travel for a while, and you get to this spot where you think, okay, I think we can start it here. And so you start with basically a simple hut above ground, but your people have the ability to expand and build new huts above ground. But really the fun begins when you start to explore the caverns below. And that's where the story really is and where it really, really shines. So in this game, you build huts, you gain new villagers, and when you use villagers, they become tired and exhausted, and they have to rest in order to be used again. And so you have to have enough places for them to rest, enough beds. And as you are exploring the caverns below, you're going to be gaining resources, hopefully. Things you're looking to gain are various resources, money in order to build more, and you're trying to gain reputation. Reputation track, the higher you get, or I guess the lower you get on the reputation track, the better. But lower is good, not this is a game about below the ground. Where the trading mechanic comes in with these resources that you get, the resources can be worth points. You can store these resources at the bottom of your player board in order to gain points. And you're going to gain points based on the resources are in varying degrees of rarity. So the more rare the resource, the more valuable they are, the more valuable that they can be depending on where they're stored on the bottom of your board. You have to start in the bottom left, and once you put one resource there, one type of resource there, that spot can only contain that type of resource. You store new resources just to the right of that. The further to the right that you are, the more valuable those resources can be. The trading mechanic comes in up on the top left of your board. You have a spot where you can basically advertise a resource for sale. Anybody that wants to take an action to try and purchase that can bid on it. There's a minimum that you can determine what you'll accept.
Minimum printed on the board.
But you can raise the minimum.
Yeah.
You put this resource up there. If I'm thinking, you know what, I don't need rope for what I'm doing down on the bottom, gaining points. This is one that I can see Andy has rope on a spot where he's going to get 3 points per rope. He might really want this, so I'm going to put it up on the top of my board. The minimum I'm going to accept for this one is 4 coins. You can only ever have one thing for trade at a time. It's not a huge part of the game, but it can become vital for Andy and what he's working on over on his board in this example. It could be a huge thing that he's working on to try and advance his points. And so he might really be willing to do it. Other people might not be interested at all.
You bring up a good point with that, because maybe I've placed rope in my first spot, which makes it only worth 1 point. In your example, maybe you put it on a spot that's worth 3. So for me, it's only worth 1 point continually to place rope on that spot. When you put resources down there, you have to put them all on the matching location where you've already placed a resource. Or if you don't have it down there, then you place it on the nearest empty space. So if rope's only worth 1 point to me, then it's going to be worth selling, especially because maybe there's a building out there that I don't have enough money for, and I'm really interested in selling that rope to get a little bit of extra gold so I can purchase another room that has a bed in it, or another room in my house that is worth lots of points.
That's one of the things with all these rooms. They have some that are worth points. Some of these rooms might actually produce different resources for you. You might want it because it's going to produce a lot of gems, and gems might be worth more to you right now. Point is, it's very different. That's one of the reasons that I like this game for this topic, is because it's a very different. It includes the mechanic, but it's different than a lot of other games. It's not as like we have to do this every time. I've played several games where it hasn't happened at all. But I've played several games where it has happened a couple of times, but it's been very deliberate and very strategic when it is done. Completely different take on it, but it adds to the game.
That's the strength of that mechanic. It adds just another layer of strategy while you're playing the game, especially like I mentioned before, if you need the gold for maybe a building that another player would benefit them as well, and it's a race to get that building, sometimes it's worth sacrificing that point to get that extra money to afford that building, because it's going to be worth more points. There's the other cards that you can gain that are common cards that are always out that don't replenish like the building cards do. Lots of different reasons why you would possibly want to do that trade. Maybe someone else that's playing that you're not competing with one of those buildings for is willing, oh yeah, that's going to help me big time. I'll do that. It's a very cool mechanic. I would like to play a game where we use it more. I think that'd be interesting, but we haven't as of yet.
So I own this game, but I haven't played it. I've played Near and Far, which has pieces that can be used in Above and Below. My question to you is, Above and Below a scenario-driven game like Near and Far is?
Not scenario-driven per se, but it's narrative-driven, so it's story-driven. So you're basically going underground and going on adventures. You have heroes that have different abilities. So you have to use a hero with a feather on them to be able to recruit new villagers. You have a villager with a hammer, so if you're going to build anything, you have to use that villager that has the hammer symbol on them. Almost every villager has lanterns also. Lanterns are going to help you when you go exploring. There'll be a die value at the bottom of every single villager that's going to tell you when you go down on an adventure, you're going to roll the dice. You're going to compare that to the die faces that are at the bottom of your villager. That will tell you how many lanterns you're going to get. Maybe you don't get any because you rolled poorly, so that villager doesn't produce any lanterns. Or maybe you rolled really well, or you have a really good villager that has low numbers, so you don't have to roll very high at all, and they produce 2 lanterns. You can take as many villagers as you want on an adventure, or you can split them up and go on 2 separate adventures.
So it feels kind of scenario-like because the story is so fun,
but each time you're
done. Each time you're finished,
you're playing the same story.
Yeah, you're not playing
not the same story. I've probably played the game 7-8 times, and I think I've heard one of the same things over because there's just so many different excerpts that are going to be.
Yeah, because there's a deck of cards that you'll flip over, and then you'll roll the dice. And anyway, it's random every time, and there's enough story material in there that you're not going to get a lot of repeating. But you don't have a book like in Near and Far.
Okay.
That you open up and it's the map. It changes. It's not like
from
that.
Scenario to scenario.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Picked up the game in a trade. So this is
a
trading game for me.
Don't confuse us.
A traded game, but I haven't played it. My daughter and I really enjoyed Near and Far, so I was looking forward to trying Above and Below.
I actually think I like Above and Below better than Near and Far.
Oh, really?
I think so. Okay. They're really close, but I think I enjoyed that a little bit more than Near and Far. But we've only played Near and Far once. I'd like to play it again. Mm-hmm. I know you'll like it. It is a solid game.
Excellent. I'll look forward to trying that. Tell us about your game, Andy. I'm super excited about it. And if you're done.
A few weeks ago, we were going to have some extra people at game night. And I believe we thought we were going to have 6 people. So I went scouring through my games to find games that were 6 people and above. And I dusted off one of my old games called Bootleggers. 3 to 6 players, best with 6, which is kind of odd because usually it's right in the middle, but this one's actually best with 6 players. It has 3 designers, Ron Beyer, Ray Eifler, and Steve Gross. And the publisher is Eagle Griffin Games and Mayday Games. It's January 1921. Prohibition has been in effect for a year, and it looks like the 18th Amendment is here to stay. Problem, however, is that outlawing the manufacture, sale, or transportation of intoxicating liquors hasn't done anything to reduce the demand for booze. As a result, illegal stills dot the countryside, and secret, or not so secret, speakeasies are popping up all over cities, large and small. Local law enforcement may look the other way, especially if they're properly motivated. But Elliot Ness's G-men are harder to convince. With this much money at stake, organized crime is sure to take an interest. So in Bootleggers, players are going to take on the role of enterprising bosses that seek to make a name for themselves in the illegal alcohol trade at the height of the 1920s during the Prohibition era. Deceit, lies, alliances of convenience are the norm as players attempt to control distribution through money and corruption by muscling in on the competition, paying off local law authorities, building underground speakeasies, and shipping trucks of hooch.
Good old hooch.
It had been a long time since I'd played this game.
Mm-hmm.
Played with the 4 of us, and it was the funnest game of Bootleggers I have ever played.
I had a blast with this game. I thought
was.
it was a good time.
I thought it was going to be horrible because it started off fairly early on. There was some stuff going on where I had the whole Monopoly feeling. The whole couple people ganging up to just make it so somebody is just done for. I was the done for. And I was like, oh, great. This is going to be one of those. But
Well, it happened because Andy played a card on you that just kind of neutered you for a whole round, right?
No,
Right.
it didn't actually.
well, it was supposed to.
It was supposed
It
to.
was supposed to.
But then Nathan came and stepped in to save the day.
So before we get into that, as whiskey runners or bootleggers, you have a family still. And you have a 6-sided die on that still that's going to produce the whiskey every single round. Now, at the beginning of the game, everybody's going to play a muscle card. And these muscle cards have a number on the top corner, and that's going to determine who is going to act first in the round. So everybody's going to secretly play this muscle card. We flip it over at the same time. It's going to have not only just that number, that's going to say how many guys, basically, you're sending in to muscle in on the competition. You're going to muscle in and get the cards or get the truck that you want or whatever it is out of the men of action cards that are available. That means that you also, the higher the card, the more it's going to cost to pay those men to muscle in on your competition. So you have to pay those guys, and then there's an upkeep on your trucks. After we determine who goes first, then we pick cards. So there's men of action cards that are on the board, and there's always a truck card available. And you can select the truck card or any of the men of action cards in turn order according to whoever has from highest to lowest muscle on their cards.
And those men of action card, there's only one per player, right? So
Correct. Yeah, so in our game we had 4 men of action cards and then the truck card. There's always one extra card to pick from. And the men of action cards range from things that you can do, you can play later in the round. One of the cards allows you to either add 2 additional 6-sided dice to one of your stills. At the beginning of the game, if that was available, I could add 2 dice to my family still and have 3 dice on my family still. Or, on that same card, if I choose to forego that benefit, I could add a remote still, a separate still that is not part of my family still, which can be beneficial when the heat is on you. Whoever produces the most whiskey in the round, after the 4th round, you get the copper placed on your still. And if you roll a 5, on any of your dice in your family still, you produce no whiskey at all on your family still. So having a remote still can be super beneficial.
just to go on, when you're rolling those dice, that's how many crates of whiskey you're generating that round.
Correct. Yep.
So if you have 3 dice on there, you're generating anywhere from 3 to 18 crates of whiskey. Whereas if you only have 1 die, you got 1 through 6. Having multiple die is great. The card becomes very valuable, especially early on.
And, going along with that, if you produce lots of whiskey, say, but you need the trucks to run that whiskey, right? Everybody starts with a small truck, which only holds 4 crates of whiskey. A medium truck holds 6, and a large truck holds 9. But this is where the trading begins. So let's say I produced 18 whiskey, and I have a medium, and a small truck. That means I can only ship out 10 crates of whiskey, but Nathan has a large truck that has no whiskey in it at all. So now I can say, oh, well, I'll give you all 8 of these whiskey. What do you want to pay me for them? Or I'll take these for 10 G's for all of them. So that's where the wheeling and dealing starts to happen.
Or I could rent you my truck.
Or you could rent me your truck. I pay you for the truck, and I load all those up. And then we move on to the next phase, which is we line the trucks up at the speakeasies. Only certain speakeasies are open. Only one is open at the beginning of the game. And we're placing influence markers. We're placing our little gangster markers on the speakeasies to try to gain the most influence in those speakeasies. There's 3 different levels of control, of influence. You can have control, which means you have equal to or greater than everybody else in that speakeasy. You can have majority, which just means you have more than everybody else. Or you can have minority, which is you have at least one influence on there, but you don't have majority or control. Or you cannot have anything. So I guess there's 4 different levels of influence. You're going to line your trucks up. There's 3 lanes. Whoever has majority or control lines up in the 3-star lane. 2-star lane is for those that have minority. And then the 1-star lane is the public dock. And that's where everybody who doesn't have any influence in that speakeasy can line up. Once the speakeasy's open, and there has to be a certain number of influence markers on that speakeasy for it to open up, then people can start running their whiskey to those speakeasies. Each speakeasy will roll a 6-sided die, and that is going to determine how much whiskey that speakeasy wants for that round. Whoever's in the 3-star lane sells all of their whiskey first, so having control or the majority of the influence in that speakeasy is super beneficial because you sell first. And then after you've sold all of yours, if there's still whiskey that is
still
whiskey demanded in the speakeasy, then the minority people get to sell. And then finally, if there's still demand for whiskey, then the people at the public dock get to sell. Another downside to being in the public dock, though, is there's someone that has control or majority can decide whether those people at the public dock can or cannot sell. And sometimes you have to, a little bit more money. I'll pay you an extra G if you'll let me sell at the public dock.
Going back to, if you have control of that speakeasy, for every crate of whiskey that's sold, you will collect X amount of money.
Correct.
And then if you sell yours, you will collect additional X amount of money. So in the example, like the first speakeasy, for every crate that's sold, whoever controls that or has the majority will gain 1,000 per crate. And then if you sell there, you get 2,000 per crate. And then if anybody who's in the minority lane sells there, they will also get 2,000 per crate. If they sell, you get 1,000 also. And so that doesn't come from the player, that comes from the bank. If anybody that's in that open lane sells at that speakeasy, if there's still demand remaining, will also sell for 2,000. And then you, Andy, as controller, would again gain 1,000. So you want to sell the whiskey because you want the money so that you can have money to pay for bigger trucks, pay for, what else do you pay for?
You pay for bigger trucks. Muscle. You have to pay for your muscle.
Your muscle cards.
Right? A lot of it is just wheeling and dealing, right? Yeah. I think more money switched hands wheeling and dealing in that game than purchasing anything.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
For sure.
That was the most trading I've ever seen playing Bootleggers during the last game we played. You know, one of the other benefits to things you can do with your speakeasies is you can upgrade that speakeasy. You can upgrade it to give it an additional die for demand. It's beneficial for the person who has control of the speakeasy to upgrade that, but it also may be beneficial for someone who maybe doesn't have influence or a minority influence in that speakeasy to upgrade that speakeasy so they have a better chance of actually selling something there. But gaining control of speakeasies is very much the way to win because you get a piece of the pie on every single crate of whiskey that gets sold there. And Dave destroyed us in that game, and he had the largest speakeasy. With our player count, he was getting 2 Gs with every single crate that was sold at his speakeasy. And he had the most dice also for the highest demand.
And every crate that you sell there, you got 3 Gs for, right? Or was it 4 Gs?
Yeah, anybody who sold there would get 3 Gs, and then I would get an additional 2.
It was insane. He was making so much money by the end of the game. The game lasts for 12 rounds. You have 12 muscle cards. There's a little bit of hand management in it. A lot of trading. There's a little bit of area control with the speakeasies themselves. Awesome game. We had so much fun. We were laughing so hard with that game.
Yeah.
But why did we have so much fun?
Because Nate saved the day.
So Andy had a Men of...
I had a Men of Action card that was going to shut down Dave's huge speakeasy that he was making like 50 G's every single round.
Well, he hadn't.
Well, I hadn't yet. That's the
he
thing.
did
is
the
I've
one
been,
round.
He did the first round. It was the second round
I've been saving up first 5 rounds of the game, not spending anything, not placing any of my influence anywhere. So I was just minimally gaining anything.
And Logan had played a card on you right before that. I can't remember what he played.
Everybody was kind of picking on you, which is why you had that feeling, right?
Right,
like,
absolutely.
You could tell he was about to start making just so much money, so we got to at least shut it down for one round.
They've just invested everything that I had, and I was like, okay, I'm going to be sending all my trucks out, but then they played this, and so it was literally, I was going to make $0
shut down
round.
all production at that speakeasy.
Yeah. Nate had a Men of Action card that would cancel another Men of Action card.
Yeah, so he had thugs that was blocking your speakeasy.
Mm-hmm.
I had a card that essentially called in the Popo to chase off his thugs.
So I believe the negotiation went, I'll send in the Popo to...
well, he said for 10
G's.
G's. And I said, done. Right?
And I was like, oh, I should have said more.
Well, in fact, Nate walked away from the table to grab some water, and he's like, oh, I should have done more. But by the time he came back, there was already another 10 grand in front of him. And I paid him 20 grand like each of the next 3 rounds. I felt like I was going to be completely shut down. It's been a long time since I played the game, so I didn't know how powerful my setup was at that point. The thing that made it so fun, though, was just thematically and what was going on. We're kind of imagining the thugs. I'm imagining hey, for 10 G's, I'll set them up, right? Like,
yeah, I'll rent you my truck. I'll do this. I'll do that. Yeah, and that was actually one of the few games of playing that I really kind of got pulled into the theme. And I had a blast with the game.
I did too.
Anxiously looking forward to playing it again. And hopefully it's not a dull, boring experience like Dave was worried about, because that last game was a superior experience for sure.
I think we need to get 6 players to play that.
Yeah, I'd like to try that for sure.
So yeah, that's Bootleggers. I believe it's published by Mayday Games now. My copy was from Eagle Games, but I think that's moved over to Mayday at this point.
What year did that come out?
Came out in 2004.
Also jumping back in time, but I'm only going back to 2006. I'm talking about Space Dealer. It's a 3 to 4 player game by Tobias Stapelfeldt, published through Pegasus Spiel, Rio Grande Games. Let me read the description here. This game has a soundtrack that you can play with it, or a 30-minute timer. So the game is 30 minutes, Dave. You cannot alter that, control that, stop that at all. So it is 30 minutes. And all players are simultaneously taking their actions. It's a little chaotic, but can be a ton of fun. Players start with their own planet that has a power generator and a mine on it. Each player is racing to generate goods and deliver them to other players. So the only way that you're going to score points is by delivering goods to another player. An example, my starting mine, if somebody comes and fulfills the need for that mine, they will get 2 points, and I would get 1 point since it's my card. Mine would require 2 different colored resources. I can upgrade my tableau. I can upgrade my generator so I can have 3 buildings on it. I can add a building. There's a technology track that will allow me to add more advanced buildings, move my ship to try to collect resources at a different planet. The great thing about this game is it's all based on sand timers. Every action you take, so if I want to upgrade a building, I put a sand timer down, and I have to wait for that sand timer to deplete. And then once that sand timer is depleted, I have built that building. If I'm going to move my ship, I put a sand timer on my ship. I wait for that sand timer to expire. Once it's done, I've moved that ship. If I need to move it a second space, I have to turn that timer back over. Each one of these action requires using the sand timer. You hurry up and say, okay, I'm going to do this. And then you're just going to sit back and you wait. And then you say, okay, I'm flipping over these. I'm going to do this and I'm going to move there. And then if I ever get to the same location as somebody else and they have goods and I have goods, I'm like, okay, let's trade and we can do that while we're waiting for other timers to expire. And then I can gather the goods. We've swapped goods. Then I can move to my destination. So I will turn that sand timer over, begin moving my ship. And then as I draw cards, I can go ahead and I'm going to upgrade this. So you're constantly flipping those sand timers over. Each player is going to have 3 sand timers you're going to be in control of. There's nothing more frustrating than when you're concentrating on one thing And these sand timers aren't necessarily calibrated, so some of them are faster than others. You have to keep an eye on if you're watching one sand timer and the other sand timer depletes and you're like, oh, totally forgot that's done. I really have enjoyed this game. Haven't played it in a long time. I actually have 2 copies of it so that you could expand the player count.
That was going to be my question. I'm seeing a lot of pictures with lots of players. And that was my question, if you could add players by having an extra copy.
Yeah, so I have 2 copies, which Brent and I each bought a copy way back, and then I think I acquired them. We never actually played a game with more than 4 players, but yeah, you can buy additional copies and run this game. We played it a number of times. This is before I was tracking games. Long before I was tracking games, so I can't say how many times we played it. Well, we played it several times just because the excitement of it, you're just zoned in watching your timers, and it can get very quiet, and then all of a sudden it gets very loud when you're at the same location. Hey, I'll trade you this, trade you that, trade you that. Okay, great. Go back to watching your sand timer. And you have the soundtrack that's going in the background that's...
Oh, really?
That's
awesome.
Kind of similar to Escape, where you just have the soundtrack. I mean, the soundtrack's not like giving you the anxiety or the intensity of Escape, but it's just kind of going in the background, so you're listening to it, but as soon as that soundtrack stops, the game's over. Then you evaluate who has earned the most points. That player is declared the winner.
That sounds like a lot of fun.
It was a lot of fun. Both copies are sitting right there, and they need to be dusted off, just like Bootleggers. Next time we have more than 4 players, that's a game we can definitely pull out to
accommodate the extra player count.
Yes. That is Space Dealer. You might have a hard time finding it these days. This is not one that's readily available, so if it's a game you're interested in, you'll have to see if you can find it in a trade.
Right.
Since we're talking about trade games, This is a game that you could also try to acquire in a trade, such as Above and Below. I would recommend it. If you have as many games as me, it's easy to lose that in your collection.
I'm always a fan of games that have background music. I like it that it's the time for your game to end, but just adding to the ambiance helps you kind of dive into the game.
Kind of like our bootlegger experience we were talking about, right? Like anything that helps you feel it.
Right. So those are our 3 picks for trading games. Let us know what you think, or any trading games that you thought of as you have listened to these last 2 weeks of episodes. If there's anything that you thought maybe would be a fun trading game that we should try, let us know on Facebook page or on Instagram. We'll take a look at those.
Next week we have another trading game that we will be talking about. Come join us for that one. We'll spend the whole episode talking about Museum.
Until next time,
we'll see you at the game table. You can get traded games like Above and Below, Space Dealer. Trading games is cool.